All right, everybody out there, if you're listening, thanks for checking out my channel at Sitting in the Dark Talking to Myself, or just still doing it. So I wasn't going to post any more videos this evening, but I'm going to post one more. But first off, let me give a shout out to some of the people out in Tarot Land. Thank you guys so much for being an inspiration for me being able to start doing this. I hope it reaches everybody that it can possibly reach, and it helps everybody that it can possibly help. So I'm going to thank 222 Tarot, Sally. Thank you so much for being on point every morning. It's one of the first things that I do on some days when I wake up is I'll scroll in and see what message you have for me that day. So thank you for that message. Gary's Tarot. Thank you so much, Gary, for your messages. I really appreciate your vibe. It's, you put a lot of positivity out there in the way that you read your messages. Good or bad news. You don't, you make it a news that's easy to take no matter what. So I appreciate that, for sure. And then, I would like to thank Opulent Spiritual. Thank you for doing tea leaf reads. I'd never really gotten into those before, and they're very interesting. So thank you for having the insight to read them. I'm not sure I would be able to do that either, but that's not my talent. It's yours. But just thank you for sharing it with everybody, and I hope that everybody appreciates your messages, and you guys help a lot of people find their way. So thank you guys. So what I'm going to talk about right now is I have a personal story to tell people, because I want it to be understood about what really truly happens potentially whenever somebody launches a smear campaign against you. And so sometimes in life, in most people's lives, a situation will happen where it basically, pits two people or two groups or two whatever against each other, for whatever reason that it does. And sometimes it's something silly like like somebody breaking up with somebody else, or it could be something as heavy as somebody dying. And so this whole past last year has been a really, really rough year for me and my family. My little family of girls that I have, and we've gone through a lot of transitions and changes, and some some tragedy. So last April, my daughter and her boyfriend had gone out with a guy, with some people that they knew, out to go shoot guns. And sadly, my daughter's fiance, boyfriend, his life was accidentally taken. He was killed, shot, and didn't make it. And it was the most profound, rawest experience that I have ever had to go through as a human, as a mother, as a person, as a light worker, as all of it. It was really a horrible thing to have to go through that whole experience. And then, how it went down. Basically what had happened was that, my daughter's boyfriend was shot, and he basically died, in her arms. She performed CPR on him until the ambulance got there and the medics got there. And then she called me and told me what had happened. And by the time I got out to the scene, which, oh, by the way, the girl that took me out there, her name is Selena, and, dude, she really was solid for me on that, dude. That was really rough. So I just want to shout out to you, Selena. Thank you so much, girl, for being a solid for me in that, and being there for me when nobody else obviously wasn't being there for me, and helping me through that. But she ended up taking me out to the scene of the accidents, to pick up my daughter. Now, what I pulled up on, it was very chaotic, and, it was very surreal and unreal, and so when I pulled up there, they had just announced over the, with the cop radio that Alex hadn't made it, and, oh, sorry, name, the boyfriend didn't make it, at the hospital, and So when I pulled up, my daughter is, she's, losing her shit, standing in the middle of the road, surrounded by cops, like losing her shit. And then, so I'm like getting out of the car and I'm, raising hell because, the way they'd handled it, it was pretty bad. And I looked over and I seen a guy sitting in, in a police car, and he was absolutely just devastated. He was in cuffs, and at this point I had no idea what's going on. My daughter had just called me and said, "Hey, mom, she got shot." So I'm just trying to get out there for her, to see what, it was just a pretty heavy thing. And so there's just all this chaos going on, and my daughter gets in the car and she's covered in, in blood. And I said, and she was like, I was like, why, what the hell? And she's like, well, from doing CPR, mom, and she had done CPR on him until the medics took him to, came and got him, took him to the hospital, and then he passed away at the hospital. And then, so we're up at the hospital and everybody, we're calling parents and, trying to get a hold of people, and so anyways, that whole thing ensued, and, I may get into more of the details about that later, but I don't know. But, what happened was what had happened. It was an absolute accident, and there's no way that anybody can convince me, because I've seen the aftermath of what had happened, and there's no way that anybody can convince me with any kind of evidence or any kind of whatever that it wasn't exactly what that it was an accident. And so we had left the hospital, and at the time, my daughter, she's 17 at the time, and I was really, like going through some stuff, and she had, she was living with her best friend at the time, not at my home. She wouldn't come home with me, so that I could, or whatever. She went back to her best friend's, which incidentally is where her boyfriends, both of them live there at this best friend's. For reasons that, it don't really make a difference here or there anyway, but they both had, her and her boyfriend lived at the best friend's house. And so anyways, the next day I called her every day, or I called her in the morning, very early in the morning, to check on her. And, of course she's kind of shaken, and I thought, and I've already made plans, that as soon as I can get her into, somewhere where she can get some therapy going already, that was going to already go down, be taking place, that she was definitely going to need some kind of a trauma therapist, for this, because this is not something that every 17-year-old girl goes through, this is a very traumatic thing that happened. And I was really, very, very worried about a lot of things surrounding this whole, this whole situation. So I guess it was the very next day is whenever the messages started coming in, and now she had always been on really good terms with his family, and the thing is Alex, he had lived at my house for a little bit, and then I allowed him to move to the best friend's house, based on other things, circumstances, nothing horrible, just circumstances. She had to get to school. She's doing medical, she's doing her school for, going to a medical high school at half the day, and then regular high, and there's just a lot of going back and forth. And I had been put into a position where I didn't have a vehicle to take her to all these places, and so I had allowed her to move to her best friends because they were doing the same thing, and it was just easy and convenient for everybody to get to where they needed to go. And so, but with that being said, her boyfriend lived with us mainly because his mother has decided to make different choices, and he, wanted to stay and move out. She had moved out of town, and he wanted to stay there with my daughter, and, so that was all. But he, the boyfriend, he lived with us, and we took care of him for a little while, and then he went over to this other people's, his best friend's house, and he was living there for a little while, and he was just kind of couch floating, because, he wasn't, there was just other things too there. I'm not trying to put anybody on blast, but let's just say he wasn't, we were taking care of him the best that we could, in lieu of the absence of his parents, and so, my daughter was on really good terms, with his mother, and, I don't think she'd ever met his father, but, on good terms with the family. And I noticed that they had set up a GoFundMe page, for the funeral expenses, and, and whatnot for her boyfriend. And, anyways, it was just a really sad thing, and I know, my daughter, the boyfriend had just bought her an engagement ring, had just, they had their plan, their whole life planned out, like this summer, he was going to, join the military while she, wrapped up her high school stuff and started getting ready to do, what she was doing. She's wanting to be a nurse. So she, and they were going to get married this summer, and he was going to join the military while she finished school, and then she would join him. They had their whole lives planned out. In fact, one of the first things, whenever she got into the car at the scene of the accident, she said, we're starting to drive off, and I looked back at her, and she's in shock. She's in shock. And she just looks at me and she said, Mom, we never got to get married. And I was like, and I just told her, I was like, look, don't do that. Just don't do that, and anyways, this whole thing, went down. So anyways, the next day, I had talked to her, and then later that morning, and then later, I guess it was that afternoon or at some point during the day, she had called me, and she's like, Mom, they're saying weird things on, I don't understand where these are coming from. And so she had sent me a screenshot of a post that one of the boyfriend's best friend's little sister had posted on an account, and I don't remember where it was or whatever, and it just basically said something to the effect of saying, y'all should be ashamed that, of what has happened, and that, he lost his life over a dumb girl and something else. And I was like, what does that even mean? Like, what the hell? So anyway, so then it all started coming out. I'm looking on the boyfriend's account, and I'm seeing things, and there's comments, and I'm starting to, and then the boyfriend's mother had sent a message to my daughter's messenger, talking about, well, I know how you did him, and you made him do da 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 da, and you should be ashamed, and I hope God punishes you. It was just a bunch of weird stuff like that. And I was like, what the hell? Like, why are they acting that? That's so weird. Like, what the, this girl just went through this really traumatic thing. And like the next day, it's like, you're talking shit, and you're the one who kicked him out of your house, 3 months ago. So why are you talking crap? She kicked him out. I mean, it was just crazy. And but then as time, and that's kind of what really got the ball rolling on the whole thing. And so before I knew it, I'm having to tell my daughter to turn all her social media off. Don't pay attention to anything. There's news reports coming out that's got information so wrong, facts that aren't even facts. I mean, to the point where I actually messaged the news station, and I let them have it. I'm like, dude, none of the shit you're saying is even correct. You made no effort to talk to the people who were actually at the scene when it happened. You're just talking to grieving family members, and they're saying all this stuff that my daughter lied. Like, what did she lie about? Like, you have no idea what's really going on, because there were 4 people there when it happened, and none of y'all were any of those 4 people. And then, my daughter, it was just a mess. It really was. There's all these people, talking shit and making, creating tension where there was no reason to be tension on top of all the grief that was going on, And it was all because, I'm sure that somebody, read the post, and it all went, south from there. But then it went even further than that. They wouldn't even let us into his funeral. My daughter never got closure because of all of this. Wasn't even allowed to go into the funeral, and then stuff just kept coming in to the point where I had messaged the aunts, and the boyfriend's 2 aunts, and I was all like, look, and I mean, I'm not really talking anything other than facts. It was like, I don't know where y'all are getting your information, but I know what y'all are saying is incorrect, and y'all need to, get some brains about yourselves and get yourselves under control, or whatever I said. Basically I said, because, it's a tragic thing that has happened, and losing the boyfriend has really been devastating for us too, is what you need to understand. And y'all need to quit your witch hunt over things you don't even know. The investigative report hasn't even been released. Y'all don't even know what's being said. They're not going to tell you anything. And basically just telling them, like, you guys need to stop this, because you're going to drive my daughter, to a point of doing something, hurting herself. And I said, I'm not going to be so calm about it with anything if it doesn't stop and it drives her to do this. I'm not going to be, you're going to basically cause the death, another senseless death of a child with all this slander and this smear campaigning and talking about this was going on and this was going on. And like one of the news reports even said they were told they were going skeet shooting, but they were told lies. But what they found out later, that was a lie. Well, where are you getting your information? Because I have a 4-second video that clearly shows, that was taken about 30 minutes before he was shot, where it clearly shows that is exactly what they were doing. It shows a picture, the video is him launching skeet into the air for the other guy to shoot. You guys don't know the facts. Not to mention, and then I'm all over the TV people. I'm just like, dude, y'all are sitting here stating facts that are not true. That there's no basis on any of that. Not to mention, y'all didn't even talk to the other side. You didn't even talk to us. Y'all don't, and the family doesn't know anything, because the statements have been made, and at this point, which I didn't know at the time that the reason for this, but the Rangers, that were investigating investigating the shooting, even a week later, dude, they still had not interviewed my daughter, and still there's all these things being said, and it was, to watch my daughter go through this, I was like, no. And then she called me one morning and she was like, Mom, because I told her to take, I made her stay home from school for I knew I was going to make her stay home for a couple of weeks anyway, just for the backlash to die down. And, my daughter was devastated. She was devastated, and there's all these people that should have been there to support her because she loved him. And you can't tell me, the love that they had between the two of them, even at 17, I'm not, going to sit here and say that I would have, would have been crazy about my kid getting married at 18 because I think that's really young. But I also saw them in the way that they were and the love that they had. And I knew that they, that went down, that they were going to make it, and then in an instant, it's all taken away from them. And then here is this family who, and I just couldn't figure out. I could not figure it out. But then I started putting 2 and 2 together. And really what it amounts to is that it doesn't make sense that this kid is no longer with us because he was a great boy, I loved him. I loved him just like one of my children, and my daughter's going through all of this and I just don't know what to do to help her. And I can't make them shut up, obviously, and all this. And so my daughter had called me and she said, Mom, she said, I'm sitting here and she said, I can't stop staring at the door, of the bedroom where they stayed in over at her best friend's house. She said, Mom, I can't stop staring at the door. And I said, okay. And at that point right there, I was like, I got to figure out what to do, man. I had already taken her up there. We were, they had said at the place where I took her to start the trauma therapy that it would be, 4 to 6 months before they got her in. And I'm like, no, she's got to go in right now. No, and just all these things. And then she told me that she was scared to go back to school, She said, I don't want to go back to school. A bunch of his cousins go to school there. And I don't know, with all these things being said or tossed around and the way that they're trying to spin the whole story. She said, I'm scared to death to go back to school. My kid didn't do anything wrong. She did everything. She was trained in CPR. My daughter, I'm sorry, my kid, she did what most adults in that situation would not have been able to do. I don't give a shit who you are. My daughter set everything aside and, did what she knew to do to try to save his life. And then you've got all of this fucking shit coming in, talking about, well, this and this and, and we found out this today, so I'm calling, I don't know what to do. I had called the investigating sheriff and asked him, hey, I know you can't do anything about what people are saying, but is there any basis of truth? Like, do they have any information to be saying this? And he was like, no. He said, we won't even release the investigating report until the first court date for the guy, for the guy who did it, which was an accident. They had charged him with, manslaughter, manslaughter reckless or whatever that charge is. And they were talking shit about, well, he was a murderer and a predator and this and that. You go on the dad's page and, there's all kinds of, he just went crazy, talking all this crazy shit. And that's not even who this guy was, posting the dude's rap sheet online, which didn't have anything on there, but that would have been super, super incriminating, and, that would have implied that he had done anything foul to this kid. In fact, he had the guy who shot Alex, really treated him like a son, and, he had taken Alex and my daughter, he had taken them to a monster show truck for Alex's birthday because Alex was so upset that none of his family even called him. And he cried to me about that. He was like, my mom didn't even call me on my birthday, And so I have all this information, and then now all of a sudden, the whole family's acting, like they need to be parents of the year or something. And I'm like, whoa, wait a minute, So I called the detective, and of course he tells me no information's been thrown out there about it. So I don't know, can't. And he said something to me that really made sense. And he said, when people are in pain, they want blood for their pain. And then sometimes there's situations that happen, that go down, that it just is what it is, but still people are hurting so bad over it that they want somebody to be punished for it. They want somebody to pay for it. And there's really nobody to pay. What is it? What is what it is. He said, I've dealt with the family. He said, if you listen to them, I'm a low down, dirty, piece of shit cop, that's not doing my job, And the thing is, they never talked to my daughter again because the statement that she gave to the sheriff that night when I went and picked her up at the scene was the only thing that they needed, because all of the stories collaborated. There wasn't any question of what had happened. Everything matched, and the thing is, and these people saying all of these things and making all these judgments against my daughter and the guy who shot him, or shot the boyfriend, all these allegations about all this, it was just crazy. It was so foul. All of it was foul, and so my daughter's calling me, telling me she can't stop looking at the door, and she can't, doesn't feel comfortable going back to school. Well, I had the same, I know what she was talking about. I know what she was talking about. I've been spending the last, I guess 2 months prior to this happening, basically stuck in my room staring at my security camera because, wondering, if what I was hoping would come back up the sidewalk would. My husband had left. He had taken off, and it was a absolute no contact situation between me and him. It's just like, how do you go from one side to just, and it was like a death. And so I knew what she was talking about, that she couldn't stop staring at the door. And I'm like, no, I'm not gonna, I made the decision right then and there, dude. I cannot let my daughter succumb to this like that. And I just thought, you know what? I just need to get her out of here. And so I ended up, especially after, the week had passed and they were going to have the funeral for the boyfriend, and then they wouldn't let us in, and, everybody's talking crap, and there's so much smear campaign going around the whole thing that was so unnecessary because none of it was even true, just because why did that happen? And so I ended up sending my kid all the way down to South Texas so she could hopefully get her mind right so she could finish school and continue on her path regardless of this thing, to move forward. I had to send her and then I ended up sending her little sister too, because they'd never really been separated. And she was my youngest daughter was going through it too, through the whole thing. It was just horrible, And so now I'm sitting here, having to send my children away in light of this horrible tragedy, just based on what everybody was saying who really had no idea and didn't want to take the time to look into the information or to even listen to anybody on this side of the fence to actually find out what really happened, And that's the thing. It's like I had to just let it run its course. There was a few things, like I said, I let it go on a week before I even jumped into anything, because now they're attacking my kid. And that's my kid, dude. I love her. You know, I don't care what you motherfuckers think. She could have gone, murdered a whole truck full of fucking babies and driving around town with a truck full of dead babies for all I care. She is still my daughter. And you're hurting her. You know? And she can't defend herself. And that's some bullshit. You know, and now because of all of the shit that y'all have done, y'all have created this scenario in her mind that she feels like she is so unsafe, even under me, you know, with me. And now I've had to send her away so she can get on with her life. And now I'm being cut out of parts of her life because of that. You know, I mean, I don't, you know, she's graduating this year and, you know, I mean, and since then I have moved 2 states away, but I never moved 2 states away from them under the, stipulations that I would not be able to get to them. You know, I moved into a pretty comfortable situation, honestly. And I know that I could get to them. I could, you know, be down there in a heartbeat, you know, so I had, you know, but it's like now because she's at where she's at, you know, anyways, it doesn't matter what's going on now. But anyways, what I'm trying to say is, you know, whenever there's pain involved or the fear of a loss or, something that, you know, happens and everybody wants to talk their shit. Everybody wants to get what they think that they might be owed out of the situation or whatever it is. At some point, whenever you have things go down that, you know, just are already wrecking people's lives and changing possibly the trajectory of where everybody's going. And then, you know, you get people that come in and they want to, you know, get in on the, you know, they want to talk shit or get in their ear about something or, you know what I'm saying? Or just put foul ass fucking energy out there about the whole thing. And so instead of somebody, you know, on that side of it that needed to look at it in a different perspective and understand what it was, now they're convinced, you know, that there's something foul happened because they don't know, because they didn't take the time to stop and research what happened, you know, research the problem, ask questions, talk to everybody involved so that they would have without a doubt in their, you know, at their disposal, every piece of information that they might have needed to be able to conclude, you know, whatever, you know, whatever conclusion they were going to come to. Instead of doing all that, they just jumped to conclusions based on whatever. I can sit here and tell you, I think it's because whenever they got the preliminary death certificate that it said on there as cause of death is homicide. Well, okay, most people when they think about, well, you know, homicide, they automatically jump to murder. But if you stop and look up what the definition of homicide is, it doesn't say anything about murder. It says that the death was caused by at the hands of another man, you know. But I guarantee you that's a lot of where all it was coming from, because that was on the preliminary death certificate that they had, or autopsy that they had, you know, to get the death certificate, you know, and just based on ignorance and false information and everybody else's agenda, you know, because I kind of think also too in that whole thing, there was a GoFundMe page for the funeral. Well, when it first came out, it said, you know, it was on point, you know, it was like, hey, I'm raising, you know, sadly my brother's passed away and tragically, and I'm just trying to raise funds for his funeral. Well, when all this started coming out, now all of a sudden they changed the GoFundMe page and it said that, you know, for my brother's been murdered, and that was never even a thing that was even charged for, anybody was charged with, or that was not what happened, you know, that was not what happened. But you know what? You probably get a little bit more money in your GoFundMe page for my brother was murdered, as opposed to, you know, my brother passed away. You know, so to me, that's, you know, that right there, that's that's a manipulation, you know. So, you know, if anybody is in any situation right now where they are being, there's beginning to become evidence of them starting to be the victim of a smear campaign, just remember, don't worry about it. If it's not true, it's not true. And I've always said this for people, you know, if you got somebody out there lying on your name and saying this and saying that, and you don't take the time to go find out for yourself, and you're just going to believe them, then you was already against that person anyway, you know? So, and if you didn't do it, if you didn't, you know, whatever the lie is, if that lie was never done, then you ain't got shit to worry about. You know, let them keep lying. Let them keep it up. Let them keep running their campaign for whatever votes that they think they're going to get for saying it. Because at the end of the day, it's going to make them look real fucking stupid. whenever they find out all the people that they told these things to, or tried to, try to promote it as that, that they're just going to look like idiots for saying it in the first place, because facts are facts. Facts are facts. So I don't really, see the point of getting all, crazy and worked up over things like smear campaigns and backdoor lying, for the benefits of the people doing it. Like, I just don't. Because anybody that they could possibly be saying those things to, like I said, if they knew who you were, they'll know the truth. And if they're so ready to believe whatever's being said, then that means that they were already pitted against you to begin with. And, it's not like you lost anything there, so, I mean, it's just really frustrating for me to see this evidence of this go down in my life and in anybody's life. And, and for people who do those things, you spread lies, or you try to plant seeds for this or that, that is, going against whatever, or, they just did that because, so that you would have to, so that to force you to do something, or whatever it is, you know what I'm saying? Like, that's why, and if that person who's listening to that doesn't stop and take into account, like, I don't know what was said because I never talked to her. It doesn't sound like something that he would do. He's never moved like that before or whatever. So I don't really, they don't, whatever their pain is masking their ability to do that. It's masking their ability to stop and think about it and start really, putting yourself on what line you want to be. Because if you go to the side based on a lie, or based on an assumption that you never took the time to check it out to see if it was a fact, or listened to somebody as the other side of the story, or whatever it is, well, then you just jump to the side that is already starting the whole battle off in negatively, with manipulation and lies, to get what they want. And I promise you that side will never win whatever they're fighting for. They won't, period. So just let them lie. Let them motherfuckers lie. Let them say what they're going to, because like I said, you're going to put it out there like that. And then instead of just, being right about things and knowing how people moved in your presence when they were there, why in the hell would you base anything, on that, when you didn't take the time to get the information to actually find out for sure, to find out all the facts, period. And so, anyways, for anybody sitting around talking to themselves in the dark, I hope that helps you if anybody has a situation like that going on, or, just, and for those of you that are using smear campaigns and lies and this and that, or things that you absolutely don't know, I want you to keep in mind, those things that you're lying about, or you're implementing, or you're trying to plant in somebody else's ear, for whatever reason that you're trying to do that, you need to understand that anything that you blast out is just a projection of what's inside of you, And so if you're sitting there running around saying, trying to get in somebody's ear about, let's say buying a cat, like, oh, maybe you like to go over to that person's house and you're allergic to cats. So if they get a cat, then you can't go over there all the time or whatever. And so you put in that person's ear about how horrible of a pet that cat's going to be, or whatever, and how messy, and, you don't want to commit to that cat, or, whatever. And then you don't have a cat that might have been like the best thing that you ever had, or that would have been, a very rewarding thing for you to be able to experience, was owning this cat, or whatever. It doesn't matter what, it doesn't matter. But you just automatically, instead of like researching, okay, well, does this cat actually shed that much, or does it shit that much, or whatever the hell, you just took this person's word at its, at his word, whenever maybe that you dude was saying all of those things, against the cat, because they just don't, they know they're going to lose a benefit or whatever of you getting the cat, that's usually why it goes down like that. And so I think what happened with my daughter's boyfriend's family is that they thought that because that he had died, he was gone, we had lost him, that they were going to be put on trial for the type of parents that they were, because neither one of them at the time were really in my boyfriend, in my daughter's boyfriend's lives. We were, and the mother, she has 3 kids, and, there was, she kind of just left, my daughter's boyfriend to kind of float around. And then she had another younger son that somebody else didn't have, and I'm not judging nobody for the choices that they make, but if you're making choices, for whatever reason you're making those choices, then, if it all comes out in the wash where something is you're feeling like you're gonna be exposed over something that's happened, well, I mean, I don't know what you're worried about. If you didn't do anything wrong, or you didn't do anything, or nobody put the parents on trial for his death. They were not on trial for being bad parents. Shit like that happens no matter what. You could have been the best parents in the world and given the child everything that they needed, and, had them, walk around in a Kevlar suit for whatever, and something still would have fucking happened. Being the best parents in the world. I was not the best mother. I made choices around my children, with my children, for my children, whatever, that probably weren't the best choices for them. I mean, I did the best that I could. And yeah, I did depend upon, outside family members. I mean, wasn't the only one that raised my kids. Everybody, there was, several people that helped me raise my kids, but we all raised my kids, And so if I were to be put on blast for anything, I've got an oldest daughter that I know, when she was 3 years old, I signed over, custody of that child based on, things that I was doing that was illegal. I was doing drugs. I was hanging out with people that I shouldn't have. And, and it doesn't matter the fact that that's what I was doing. What needs to be looked at is the fact that I did it, in the best interest of my child, because I'm not going to drag my kid to trap house from trap house to trap house or whatever while I'm, doing whatever I'm doing. I made the best decision I could for my kids based on what I knew was going on, but then, I did it, knowing that I could get my kid back later. I didn't ever sign over my rights or anything, but, I did sign over temporary custody. And the only reason I did that is because of what I was told by my parent of what would happen, when it was all said and done. I did because I was going, I knew I was going to jail. I didn't know how long I was going to be there, and I just want to make sure my kid was taken care of. So I signed the custody over to her, but she didn't give me all the information. She just said that when you get out and you get your shit together, we'll come up to the lawyer's office and it'll be signed back over to you. And so because I trusted my mom, she's my mom, I trusted her, well, when it comes time to do that, I get out of jail, I get a job, I'm doing good, which is everything I was doing beforehand, paying the daycare, taking care of shit, and I get ready to actually move out of their house, because I had, was managing a store and I could afford to, and I could finally move out of my parents' house. I spent 2 months in jail, and I, went to my mom and dad's house, and I just picked right back up in life where I worked, and I, did what I had always done, but I had followed everything that they had said that I was going to have to do. And then because of, following with the assumption that would happen, my mother, I had trusted her in, that she said would happen. Well, whenever it came time to move, and I'm getting ready to start packing up my daughter's room, my mom, she comes in there and she's like, "Hey, what are you doing?" And I was like, "Well, we're moving." And she's like, "Well, no, you can't take her." And I was like, "Well, why?" And she was like, "No, you don't have custody." And I was like, "Okay, well, I thought you said da-da-da-da-da." And she said, "Oh, no, you gotta, now, it's not an easy peasy thing now that she's already got what she wanted. Now, you gotta do all this. You gotta hire a lawyer, and you gotta, da-da-da-da." And, that's not what she told me, and she didn't give me that information. But I guess that was my fault for not really reading what I was signing from the lawyer. It's called a slip-in. I mean, people screw people out of things all the time like that for their own benefit without a worry about what it's doing to you. They don't care. So somebody's, smearing your, shit all over your fucking ex who ain't even there, or talking shit, or not upholding their end of the deal on things. I was told one thing, and then now you've already put in place measurements that I had no idea that that was even a thing, because I trusted you to tell me the truth about what was on those papers, you know, and it wasn't. But, you know, that's my fault. Maybe I should have, you know, again, hindsight's 2020. Hindsight is 2020. You know, so for people who move and operate like that, just know that just because you don't think that people can see you, somebody sees you. You know, somebody sees you. And so, you know, I'm going to close this out, and this is all I'm going to say is, like, you know, all of those people that know me, know what I'm about, know what I do, what I say, what I preach. You know, I'm going to try not to be a preacher, but whatever. What I teach, you know, I always get accused of trying to tell, you know, teach somebody a lesson, and that's not really what I was ever trying to do either. But all the people that actually know me personally and have seen me try to do what I do, you know, then you know what it is, and you know, I mean, don't fuck yourself over trying to make me look like I, you know, am in the wrong for just moving right along with my life, you know, and that's what it is. I'm moving right along with my life. And, you know, I've got space for people in it. If they want to be here, they'll be here. And if they don't, they won't. But I can't stop. I can't just sit in my room by myself, talking to myself in the dark. And, you know, I got to move on with shit. Just like my daughter through that death thing, she had to move on despite everything that was being said. You know, just get away from it. So just know that people are going to talk their shit because either they benefit from something that's going to happen, or they want to look in a certain light, or they're worried about this or that. And so they, for whatever reason, they got to make you look shitty, you know, even though you're not shitty, really, you know, and you have never moved any differently than you always have. And so anybody willing to listen to it and to believe it or post it and publish it, you know, I mean, you're just going to look stupid for putting it out there like that, you know, because it's all going to come out in the wash where that's not the case. And then I don't have to worry about anybody discrediting me. You know, I don't got to worry about that because I never did that. I never talked shit, you know, I mean, I didn't. But what I do, you know, but now all these things that you did, you know, with that in mind, now you are discredited, you know, because obviously it's right in front of everybody's faces. You know, well, this is what you did. You said that. So who told this? Then they're going to go back. Well, I heard it from this person, you know, and it's all going to lead back to the same source, you know, and whenever, you know, whenever that's found out, then you'll realize that all the time that you spent trying to fucking smear campaign against somebody else, that you could have spending more time, you know, taking the steps, you know, to accomplish whatever you were trying to accomplish, that you thought you were going to get faster by smearing lies everywhere or getting in ears and all that. So, you know, I mean, I can't, you know, I mean, it's pretty cut and dry right there. So I hope that nobody's going through that. I'm sure somebody is. And I hope that the message gets to everybody who needs to hear it. And just so you know, I see you. You know, everybody sees everybody for what they are. And that's the only thing that you can trust in people. I trust everybody to be just exactly what I see them being, you know. So anyways, well, thanks for listening. If you listened so far, I will, you know, have another message, you know, eventually, whenever I feel like recording something else, I guess. So anyways, y'all have a good night, and I'll see you while I'm sitting in the dark talking to myself.